Okay guys, we're ready to jump into Lightroom. Now the first thing we're gonna do is go through and cull our images really quickly to choose the image that we actually want to edit, and then we're gonna show you how to do local adjustments in Lightroom. Now this is incredibly powerful because in this case, we really wanted to get a properly exposed sky, which means that our subject is just gonna be a bit dark. So we wanna use local editing to make sure we just brighten up our subject. All right, we got a great chapter. Let's go ahead and jump into Lightroom. Okay guys, so the first thing we're gonna do here is click on our Mickey sunset, and you can see we've got 11 photos here. Now I'm gonna hit Controller Command A to select all of them, and I'm gonna hit N on my keyboard, which is gonna bring up our survey view. So I'm gonna hit Shift Tab and everything go away. So basically with my survey view, I'm able to see everything really clearly and get a good idea of, what I wanna keep and what I don't want to. Okay, so starting off, I've got some differences here. We've got some sitting shots, we've got some standing shots, we've got some standing away shots, and standing towards the camera. So just kind of looking at all these, in my opinion, the ones that impact me the most are with the subject standing towards the camera. Okay, so I'm gonna hold Control or Command and go ahead and click on the images with our subject standing away from the camera. Okay, now if you wanted to edit multiple images in the same series, you could do some sitting and some standing as well. But in this case, I'm gonna go ahead and remove some of the sitting photos. And feel free to edit whatever photo you want. We're providing you with all these raw images, so you can choose your own favorites and you can edit them your own ways. Don't feel like you have to follow along. I just wanna show you how to edit locally in Lightroom. Okay, so now let's go ahead and take away the images where our subject is sitting. So I'm gonna hold Control or Command and click on both of those. All right, and you can see we're off to a really good start. Now, this image here looks really great in the sky in the background, but our subject is so dark, I really don't think we're gonna be able to bring that back to the level that I want. So we can hit Control or Command and click on that. Now, if this were done in Photoshop, you could definitely pull some of the detail of the sky in here, but in Lightroom, we're gonna use local editing to basically darken up the sky in some of the other images. So let's hold Control or Command and we'll remove that. All right, now we're looking at some different options as far as pose goes. Now, in this case, our subject's arm is kind of like looking, holding up to her ear, and it's a little bit awkward. Not only that, I can't see what the other arm is doing so much. So that one's gonna go away, okay? Now we have the differences between these two photographs, and with this one, her hand is a little bit further away from her body, and her hand is a little bit further away from her chest here. Pose is just a little bit more dynamic. So we're gonna get rid of that one there. Okay, now looking at these two shots, they're incredibly similar. This one just has a little bit more space right here as compared to this one. So that space is just gonna give us a little bit more information as far as what we're looking at. This looks a little bit more like a blob. I'm not sure what this is. This looks a little bit more like a hand. So let's go ahead and get rid of that one as well. Okay, so we're doing great, guys. Next, we're just kind of comparing these two shots back and forth, and from here, it's gonna come down to preference between these two shots. I can see a little bit more of her hand here. This one is just kind of right down there. So I'm gonna make that one go away. And then comparing these two, this one I can only see one arm here, and this one I can see both arms. Okay, so there we go. This becomes the image that we're going to, that I choose in this photograph. So what I'm gonna do is hit the number 6 on there to go ahead and set this to a red label. Now in this case, we didn't have that many photos, so I didn't have to go through many different rounds of culling. I was able to do this relatively quickly, but if you weren't able to make up your mind very quickly, go through and choose your picks first, and then give them stars, and then you can give them a color rating. Okay, so now I'm gonna hit G to get back to my grid view. Okay, and you can see I've got one that's flagged red. So sometimes it's obvious. Sometimes you're like, okay, that's the one I want. Go ahead and flag it red. You don't have to go through all the other process. So keep in mind here, we can still have our red tag collection, okay? And we're seeing all the best images from each of the different shoots. So let's go back to Mickey Sunset. I'm gonna double click here, and now we're gonna start editing this photograph, because really what I want is I want more detail in the sky, right? Like this image, oh, sky looks great. My subject is way too dark. In this image, I can't see much of the sky. My subject is still a little bit dark, but there's probably enough information here for me to get some of the detail back from both my shadows and my highlights. So let's start off by going into our Develop tab. Okay, Now with our develop tab, the first thing I want to focus on is our sky. Now I don't want to just grab my exposure and bring that way down, because that's also going to bring my exposure down here on my subject. So we're going to start off with some of our lighter areas, like our highlights and our whites. So let's click here on highlights, and we're just going to drag that down. Okay, and I'm also going to do the same thing with my whites, just a little bit. And you're able to see we're able to get a lot more information from our highlights. Now I'm going to go to where it says tone curve, okay, and we can pull our highlights down even more here with our tone curve. Down just a little bit, and our lights just a little bit further down as well. Okay, so let's go ahead and click on our import, okay, and here's where we're at now. So we're able to see I brought a lot more detail into the sky. Okay, now I'm going to scroll down a little bit more until we see hue, saturation, lightness. All right, so right here I can choose how saturated I would like the sky to be. So I'm going to click here where it says saturation and go to my little icon, which allows me to choose the relative saturation by dragging in the photo. So let's click there, and I can click on the blue and drag up, which is going to give us, if I drag up, it'll give us more saturation of blue. If I drag down, it'll give us less. So let's give it a little bit more saturation there, and a little bit more with these oranges as well. So we're just kind of creating like a little bit more detail in the sky. All right, so I'm going to click on the slash key on my keyboard here. The slash key is right above the enter key, and this is just going to show us our before and after real quick. So you can see we were able to recover quite a bit of detail there from the sky. Okay, so scrolling right back up, the next thing I want to do is bring up my shadow level just a little bit. Okay, and now my foreground starts to look pretty good. But the problem is my subject is still way too dark. She's not really standing off the background. So this is when you want to introduce local editing. So local editing is really simple. Basically, it's only editing part of the photo. For now, like we've done global editing, we've edited everything, like we've edited all the highlights or all the shadows. So local editing, I can take just one specific part of a photo and edit just that. And when we have an example like this, where we have our subject is relatively dark against a light sky, we want to edit just our subject. So let's go ahead and jump in and show you how to do that. So back in Lightroom, we have a few different ways of local editing. So in our Develop tab, at the very top, you're going to see here's our crop. This is spot removal and red eye. And next, we're moving to our local editing tools. So here we have our graduated filter, we have our radial filter, and we have our adjustment brush. Now we're going to be using all of these tools in Photo Editing 101, but for now we're going to go with our radial filter, and they all do something very similar. So let's go ahead and click on our radial filter, and you notice when I click there, we have basically the same drop down that we did in our basic editor. Okay, so you can see the basic editors right here. The thing is, all of these sliders will only take place in part of the photo. So what I'm going to do is first start by clicking and dragging an area in my image. I'm just going to make it a little bit small right now to show you can adjust it later. Okay, so what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and bring our shadows up in just that area. So you can see our shadows are going up in that area. Now the reason I'm using my shadow slider here is because it's not affecting the highlights of my image. If I adjust my exposure, it's going to adjust the shadows and the highlights, but we get this weird little halo around our subject. Like if I had it over here in the background, you would see it really clearly in your actual photo. So I'm not adjusting my exposure. Let's keep that back at 0. We're going to bring our shadow levels up quite a bit. There we go. Now you can see I'm only editing part of my photo. So what I'm going to do is click here and just drag that down just a bit. There we go. And I'm just going to make this a little bit larger than my subject. All right. And let's go ahead and feather it a little bit more to make it look a little bit more natural. So you can see if I move this over here, it's bringing the shadow levels up over here, but right over top of my subject, now the shadow levels are brought up over top of my subject, which is exactly what we want. Okay, now I'm also going to bring up our clarity just a little bit, and that's going to help us bring a little bit more of a focal point to our subject. There we go. And as I do this, I just want to make sure that I'm actually looking at our image really small and regular and to scale. So I'm going to go to a 1/8 view. There we go. And click off there. Because when I do local adjustments, I just want to make sure that I'm not like, for instance, if it looked like that, okay, that's super obvious that we try to like brighten up our subject because it's brightening up the background. So I just want to make sure that when I'm doing local adjustments, it doesn't affect like the background, okay? So in this case, that's why I'm targeting the shadow areas. So you can look at your image from like really far away and get an idea of how it looks as a whole, just to make sure you're not like causing any kind of weird highlights or shadows in different areas. Yep, and in that case, it looks pretty good. So we're gonna go back here to fit. Okay, so what we've done is we brought up our shadow levels a little bit, and we've brought up our clarity a little bit. I increased my feathering. There we go. And I'm gonna bring my temperature just a tiny bit warmer as well. Just a tiny bit. There we go. So now let's go ahead and close off of our radial filter. There we go. Oh, by the way, if by chance you're adjusting everything outside of your circle, click on this invert mask and it'll make sure you're editing just inside your circle. So if it's inverted, just click on invert again and you're good to go. All right, now let's go ahead and click off of our radial filter. So I'm gonna use my slash key on my keyboard so we can see here's the before. Our subject is dark, our background is pretty light, and the after, our background is now a lot more properly exposed and our subject is properly exposed as well. So let's go ahead and zoom into our subject. I'm gonna zoom in. We're gonna go to a full size here. There we go. Let's just click on the 1:1 there. All right, now this looks great. We can see there's just a little bit of noise in our photo as well. So I'm gonna scroll all the way down here. There we go. Until we see under the detail slider, until we see our noise reduction. And I'm just gonna increase our noise reduction just a little bit. There we go, right about 50. I'll just type in 50 and hit enter. And you can see it's taken away quite a bit of the noise in our image as well. So zooming back out to full screen, here we can see our image looks really, really great. Okay, so the background's properly exposed and our subject is properly exposed. So these are the things that you can do when editing raw photos in Lightroom. Keep in mind, if something looks overexposed or underexposed, there's a good chance that you can get that properly exposed using Lightroom. So I'm gonna hit G to get back to my grid view. Okay, now I'm gonna hit Control or Command A to select everything. Keep in mind that my main image here is a little bit lighter than the selected images around it. Okay, we're gonna go to Sync Settings, and we have everything connected, everything checked except for spot removal, which makes sense. And let's go ahead and hit Synchronize. All right, now keep in mind, it's going to use the same settings on this image that it does on all of the others. So if the exposure was different on some of the other images, they're not going to look the same. Like for this image here, for instance, okay, now it's like still way too dark. So here's where I would go back in my develop module and go ahead and bring our exposure up just a bit. There we go. So we have a little bit more of a properly exposed photo. All right, now let's hit G to get back to our grid view. And then this photo that I just edited, I can hit Control or Command and click on these other photos. I'm gonna go to Sync Settings, and it's going to make those more properly exposed as well. So you don't really need to do this after you decide the photo that you actually want to edit. You can, you don't have to go through and edit the others, but sometimes it's a good idea to just get the exposure right on the other photos as well. So you can look back through them again and say, okay, is this really the one that I like the best now that they're all edited? And in this case, I think that it still is. So we're going to double click there and see. Beautiful. I love this photograph. It's so cool. She's an amazing subject. Her pose is incredible. Standing on her toes makes a really big difference, and she was an absolute pleasure to work with as well. All right, guys, so you can see the power of local editing within Lightroom. So anytime you have a subject that's maybe a little bit dark against a light background, don't forget about your graduated filters and your radial filters. You can brighten your subject up and keep the background properly exposed. All right, guys, that's it for this chapter. Let's see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.